The day my boss laughed in my face, I swore he'd regret ever underestimating me. I'd been with Titan Dynamics for 6 years, longer than most of our board members had even held a desk. As the lead data analyst, I'd built the predictive models that helped our trading algorithms outperform the market by 40% last quarter. My code ran the company. Literally. So when Greg Dalton, the CEO, called me into his glass-walled office overlooking the San Francisco skyline, I expected good news. Maybe the raise I'd been promised 6 months ago. Maybe even the senior analyst title I'd earned 100 times over. Instead, he poured himself a $300 bottle of whiskey, offered me water from the office dispenser, and said with that smug little smirk, "You're valuable, Mark, but not that valuable." He laughed. He actually laughed. I kept my face blank, but my pulse roared in my ears. I'd pulled 80-hour weeks to make his portfolio shine, and now he was telling me I wasn't worth an extra 20 grand a year. "Greg," I said carefully, "I've trained the new analysts. I've built the models that got us those headlines in Forbes. I think I've earned." He cut me off with a wave. "You're a great coder, Mark. But this is business. Be grateful you still have a job." That's when I saw it, the flicker of arrogance behind his eyes. To him, I was replaceable. Just another cog. A line of code in his machine. I forced a smile. "Of course, Greg. Business is business." He grinned, thinking I'd accepted defeat. But inside, a quiet, cold resolve was forming. That night, I sat in my apartment overlooking Market Street, staring at my dual monitors. Titan servers blinked in my terminal window like tiny, obedient soldiers. They were my creation. I knew every line of code, every vulnerability, every hidden backdoor. I wasn't planning anything, yet. I just wanted to look. But the more I looked, the more I saw how fragile Titan really was. One miscalculated algorithm. One corrupted data stream. One accidental leak. Greg thought I was replaceable. He had no idea how deep my fingerprints ran through the company's systems. When I finally shut my laptop, the city lights below blurred into streaks of red and gold. My reflection in the window looked calm. Too calm. That's when I realized it wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was curiosity. Just how much would it take to make Titan Dynamics bleed? And somewhere deep down, I already knew the answer. I smiled to myself, whispering into the empty room. Let's find out. The first red flag didn't come from Greg's mouth. It came from the numbers. A week after our raise talk, I noticed something off in Titan Dynamics' internal trade logs. Tiny inconsistencies, fractions of a percent, appearing in our after-hours transactions. At first, I thought it was a bug in the model. Maybe one of the junior analysts had pushed bad code to production. But when I traced the source, every irregular trade led back to a hidden sub-account labeled GD Private. Greg's initials. That alone wasn't unusual. Executives had private accounts all the time. But this one wasn't registered in Titan's employee database. It was routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. If those trades were what I thought they were, off-the-books movements timed before official announcements, it meant Greg was front-running his own company's news. Insider trading. But I couldn't prove it. Not yet. The next morning, Greg waltzed into the office late, as usual. He slapped a hand on my shoulder like we were college buddies and said, "Need you to fast-track the quarterly forecast, Mark. Big meeting with investors Monday." I nodded, trying to ignore the bile rising in my throat. As he walked away, I saw him stop by Melissa's desk, one of the new analysts I'd trained. He leaned in close, whispered something that made her laugh, and touched her arm just a little too long. She'd been here 3 months and already had a company car. I'd been here 6 years and still couldn't get a raise. Later that afternoon, I overheard Greg in the glass conference room on a private call. His tone was low, tense. "Yeah, I told you I'd handle it," he said. Pause. "No, the board won't find out. Just make sure the numbers align before Monday." When he hung up, he caught me watching and gave a half smile. "Curiosity kills careers, Mark." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words in my head. Curiosity kills careers. He was hiding something. And I was dangerously close to finding out what. My eyes burned from the glow of my monitor as I scrolled through Titan's encrypted backups. Every file, every log, every unexplained transfer. It was all right there, buried under layers of corporate polish. But the deeper I dug, the worse it got. The company I'd helped build, the one I'd sacrificed birthdays, weekends, and relationships for, was rotting from the inside. And Greg wasn't just the face of it. He was the infection. Still, part of me hesitated. Maybe I was seeing patterns that weren't there. Maybe exhaustion was warping my judgment. But then, just before dawn, I found an internal memo timestamped 2 days before my denied raise. Subject: Staff Budget Reallocation, Analyst Compensation Freeze. From g.dalton@titandynamics.com to board@titandynamics.com. Funds diverted to confidential strategic initiative. Details under NDA. The same week he bought himself a new McLaren. I thought Greg's betrayal was about money, until I realized it was about me. It started with an email I was never supposed to see. It was a Friday night, and I was the last one left in the office. The janitors were vacuuming down the hall, and the only light came from my monitor. I was combing through archived communications, looking for proof of Greg's shady Kaiman account. Then, a misfiled attachment popped up under my username. It was a forwarded message chain between Greg and the board of directors, dated 2 weeks before he denied my raise. From Greg Dalton. Subject: R&D algorithm acquisition. After reviewing the prototype, I recommend we classify Mark Reynolds' predictive model as corporate property. Effective immediately, we'll file for full patent ownership under Titan Dynamics. Compensation for the developer is unnecessary. Consider it part of his employment output. My heart froze. That model, the Titan Quant AI, was mine. I'd built it on my own time, on my personal machine, before I ever uploaded it to the company servers. It was my masterwork, the algorithm that had made Titan's trading software unstoppable. And Greg had just stolen it. Not borrowed. Not co-developed. Stolen. He'd used my own innovation to make the company millions, cut me out of credit, and locked the patent under his name. And when I'd asked for a raise, he'd looked me in the eye, laughed, and told me I wasn't that valuable. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just greed. It was a calculated erasure. He'd turned me into a ghost in my own creation. I slammed my fist against the desk, the sound echoing through the empty office. My knuckles burned, but the pain felt clean compared to the poison twisting in my chest. For 6 years, I'd been loyal. I'd covered his mistakes, cleaned up his data messes, saved his reputation after every bad trade. And this was how he repaid me, by gutting my life's work and pretending I was lucky just to have a job. I stared at his name glowing on the email header, bile rising in my throat. I should have gone to HR, or the board, or even the press. But none of those options felt right. Greg controlled everything, the narrative, the reports, even the internal whistleblower system. If I made a move now, I'd be fired before sunrise. No. I needed something bigger. Something that would hit him where it hurt. As I sat there, breathing hard, I noticed something new in the corner of my screen. A notification from Titan's secure backup server. Scheduled system update. 2 a.m. Internal model sync. An idea flickered, dark, dangerous, and perfect. If Greg wanted my algorithm so badly, maybe it was time to show him what happens when you take what isn't yours. I cracked my knuckles, opened the terminal, and whispered, "Let's see how valuable I really am." By Monday morning, the grief had hardened into something sharp enough to cut steel. All weekend, I couldn't escape Greg's voice in my head, his smug laugh, his patronizing tone, that line about being grateful. I barely slept. I just sat in the dark, replaying the betrayal like a looped video file, watching the moment my future was quietly stolen. He'd taken my algorithm, erased my name, and turned it into Titan's golden goose. The same innovation that had made our stock soar was now fueling his ego and his bank account. By Sunday night, my anger had cooled into focus. Not wild rage, precision. I spent hours staring at my reflection in the black screen of my monitor. For the first time, I didn't see the overworked, underpaid employee who kept waiting for recognition. I saw someone who'd been complicit, someone who'd allowed himself to be silenced, played, and used. And that realization hit me harder than Greg's betrayal ever could. He hadn't just stolen from me. He'd trained me to accept it. That was the real crime. At 2:07 a.m., as the automated system update began syncing Titan's core algorithms, I opened the terminal window and stared at the streams of green code flying across my screen. I could see every pulse of the network, every heartbeat of Titan's infrastructure. My creation. My fingerprint. If I wanted to, I could crash it all right now. A single line of corrupted code, and their precious trading AI would eat itself alive. My finger hovered over the keyboard, trembling. But then, I stopped. Destroying it outright would be too easy. Too clean. Greg would just spin the story, blame it on a technical failure, and walk away with a golden parachute. No, I didn't want chaos. I wanted truth. I wanted the world to see Greg Dalton for what he really was, a fraud wrapped in a designer suit. That's when the shift happened. The pain didn't disappear, but it became something new, fuel. I decided I wasn't going to beg for justice anymore. I was going to engineer it. So I started building. A quiet script buried deep in the architecture, a digital tripwire. It wouldn't destroy Titan. Not yet. But when the time came, it would expose every illegal trade, every shadow account, every stolen piece of code. I called it Project Lazarus. Because like the name suggested, it was about resurrection, mine. When I finally shut down my computer, the sun was creeping over the city skyline, spilling light through my blinds. I felt different. Calm. Clear. Greg thought I was just another employee he could dismiss. He was about to learn what happens when you underestimate the man who built your empire's foundation. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission. Revenge, I decided, would be a science, careful, cold, and impossible to discredit. I didn't want a messy hack or a loud tantrum. I wanted an infallible architecture of evidence and timing that would turn Titan's own house of cards into rubble. Over the next 2 weeks, I sketched a plan that read like a blueprint for quiet annihilation. I made a private ledger, not code, not tricks, just copies. Emails, memos, screenshots of the patent notice, timestamps from the backup server, and the trade logs that pointed to Greg's private account. Every item I included was something that could be shown, verified, and explained. No speculation. No drama. Cold facts laid end to end. Facts mean nothing without verification. I reached out to contacts I trusted, an old professor who understood algorithm IP, a former compliance officer who'd left Titan on principle, and a freelance forensic accountant. I didn't show them everything. I asked questions and played scenarios, letting them confirm that the trail I'd found could not be easily explained away. If the board could bury an engineer's contribution with a stamp, they could bury this too, unless it reached people who couldn't look away, regulators, journalists, and institutional investors. I built a narrative packet that laid out the theft and the attendant suspicious trades without editorializing. Clear, airtight, and ready to drop when it would do the most damage. Timing was the weapon. Titan had an upcoming investor roadshow and an earnings call scheduled that week. I timed the release so the first ripples would reach key analysts the night before the presentation. Panic, once seeded, spreads faster than any PR spin. Let him keep feeling omnipotent. He continued buying cars, flirting with junior staff, and polishing slides for investors. Every show of control was fuel. The more he strutted, the louder the fall would be. If the public route failed, if the board somehow stonewalled, I had conversations ready with law firms and whistleblower channels that protect the leaker. Not threats, options. The existence of those options was leverage in itself. Every step was surgical. I rehearsed my statements, boxed the evidence, and cross-checked every timestamp and signature. I slept in intervals, eyes raw, because the stakes were now personal and enormous. All the while, Greg strutted through Titan like a man who believed the world belonged to him. He bragged about next quarter's unprecedented growth in the cafeteria, invited investors for private dinners, and called me in for menial tasks that made him feel benevolent. On the morning of the roadshow, I sat at my desk holding the packet. My hand didn't shake. My heart did. Somewhere between the legal counsel I'd lined up and the anonymous tip I'd prepared for a financial reporter, there was a single switch that would flip everything. Greg smiled in the corridor, oblivious. He had no idea the day he planned to celebrate would be the first headline that made Titan's stock wobble. The room went quiet the moment the ticker turned red. It started with a ping on my phone, an encrypted message from the reporter I'd trusted. Running at 9:12. Check your feeds. I hit refresh on my laptop and watched, breath shallow, as the world I'd built and the world that stole it collided live. At 9:12 a.m., the headline dropped, exclusive. Titan Dynamics CEO accused of patent theft and insider trading. Documents show algorithm misappropriation. The article unfolded like a scalpel. Greg's memo classifying my code as corporate property, the Cayman shell transfers tied to pre-announcement trades, annotated timestamps, expert commentary from the professor, and the forensic accountant's conclusions. Everything I'd catalogued, every cold, indisputable fact, was there. In the boardroom across town, executives were mid-toast, polishing slides for the roadshow. On the show floor, investors adjusted their headsets, waiting for Greg's confident spiel. A single scroll through the live feed and the mood curdled. First, the phones lit up. Then the trading app on my screen flashed a cascade of red, Titan's pre-market drop, double digits, then dropping faster. A regulatory hotline number in the reporter's piece had already been bombarded. Within 40 minutes, the exchange issued a trading halt pending investigation. The sound of glass clinking in a million corner offices turned into whispered panic. Greg was already on stage when the reporters started calling. He smiled for cameras like a man who owns the script, until a moderator asked about recent allegations. The smile faltered. The smile snapped. He stumbled through platitudes while a producer in the control room fed the anchors a PDF with the evidence. Live on air, the anchor read the memo headline. Behind Greg, slides about growth and integrity blurred into irony. Back at Titan, the board convened an emergency meeting. Greg barged into the conference room, face flushed, voice high. He demanded the source be found, ordered IT to lock down servers, and, fearing fingerprints, tried to delete files. He didn't know I'd already pushed immutable copies to third parties and registered notarized hashes with a timestamp service. His panic felt theatrical. His control evaporated. Security stood between him and the board. Counsel read a counsel-requested letter aloud, and sex subpoena, effective immediately. The board chair, who'd smiled with him at fundraising dinners, closed her laptop and said, quietly, "We need to protect the company." The phrasing was soft. The meaning wasn't. Greg's chair was empty within an hour. Outside, the market reacted like an animal wounded. Titan's stock tumbled, 20, 30, then 37%, tickers bleeding red across screens as institutional sell orders cascaded. Commentators called it a collapse. Investors who had toasted quarterly growth 2 days ago watched billions of market cap evaporate in real time. I watched it all from the shadows of a coffee shop across the street, heart thrumming like an engine. People pointed at their phones. Strangers muttered Titan's name like a curse. My hands were steady. The fury that had driven me now tasted like something curiously sweet and unsteady. When Greg finally stepped outside the building, cameras swarmed. His eyes found me among the crowd for a fraction of a second. There was recognition there. No words, only a flash of something like fear. He opened his mouth, perhaps to plead, perhaps to curse, but the crowd drowned him out with questions. The headlines screamed. Lawyers circled. Regulators arrived. Titan stock, once the company's pride, lay wounded on the trading floor. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, as sirens neared and lights blinked on in downtown offices, a small voice in my chest asked what would come after the fall. When the smoke cleared, Titan Dynamics was worth less than the company coffee budget. In the days after the collapse, the headlines never stopped. CEO under investigation. Titan Dynamics faces SEC probe. Whistleblower exposes corporate theft. Greg Dalton's perfect image unraveled piece by piece. The McLaren was repossessed, the penthouse sold off, and his confidential strategic initiative turned out to be a string of offshore accounts now frozen under court order. The man who once laughed at my request for a raise couldn't even afford a defense team without selling stock that was now worth pennies. When the press finally published my name, Mark Reynolds, the engineer behind the Titan Quant AI, I didn't hide. My inbox flooded with messages, support from colleagues, offers from rival firms, even apologies from people who'd looked the other way for years. The same board that once called me expendable was now calling me a visionary. But I didn't want a new title. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. I left San Francisco. Moved north, where the air smelled like rain instead of ambition. I kept one laptop, one monitor, and the original hard drive that held my code, the one Greg had stolen. Sometimes I open it just to remind myself how close I came to letting someone else define my worth. Titan Dynamics never recovered. Their name became a cautionary tale in business schools, a footnote on corporate ethics slides. Greg disappeared from LinkedIn. Word is, he's consulting for startups, which is code for begging someone else for a second chance. And me. I built something new. A small firm that helps engineers protect their IP, legally, cleanly, securely. Every contract I draft now has one clause that makes me smile. Creator rights remain with the creator. Always. Sometimes at night, I replay that moment when Titan's stock ticker bled red across the screens. Not because of the chaos, but because it proved something Greg never understood. Value doesn't come from ownership. It comes from creation. He tried to steal mine. And in doing so, he gave it power. I guess that's poetic justice, isn't it? The man who said I wasn't that valuable lost everything. Because he underestimated the value of the one person he couldn't replace. If you've ever been overlooked, stolen from, or told you're not worth what you've built, this story's for you. Would you have done the same in my place? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And hey, if you've ever dreamed of turning betrayal into power, hit subscribe. Because next week, I'll show you exactly how I made Titan's empire crumble. With just one line of code.